Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Distance Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is MBF3C, grade 11 college math, and I am the teacher, Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to join me live today, you can call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen on the radio at 91.9 FM and also on the television at Bell Express View channel 972. You are always welcome to join me live through the Zoom link, which is available both from me, your teacher, and also your DEC. Our classes are scheduled from Monday through Thursday, 2 until 3 in the afternoon. And we are now in our 6th week of, no, we're not, we're in our 7th week of our 9-week course. So you definitely should know what to submit for marking at this point, but a reminder that the support questions are not for marking. They are practice problems to help you feel confident with the material. So you can decide which ones and how many to do. If you're understanding a concept, it is completely fine for you to skip questions. You don't have to do them all just because they're there. But if you need more practice problems, feel free to ask, and I'm happy to send you some. The answers are in the back of the booklets, so please check your work to make sure you're on the right track and to really set yourself up for success. The key questions, the ones with the little key icon, are the ones to submit for marking. So please do all of these, show all of your work, your steps, and your thinking. This way I can truly understand what it is that you understand. And if you're making any errors, it gives me more information to help you. So how do you submit your work for marking? There's 3 methods. The first is to scan your work and send it electronically. If you have a device, you can scan your completed work through the Notes app if you have an Apple device, or the Google Drive app if you have an Android device. These are applications that generally come free with these devices, though they are easy and free to download. If you're not sure how to use them, I have tech tutorials on my YouTube channel that walk you through for each individual app. So just go check those out on my page, and you can then send your stuff that way. Then once you have it scanned, to send it to me either through email to studentwork@nnec.on.ca and CC it to bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca, or you can send it to me through Facebook Messenger, where my name is B Slate Wahsa. Also, it's completely fine to take pictures. If you can't scan, that's totally fine if that works better for you. The second method is drop your work off in Sioux Lookout. We have an outdoor mailbox at our location 74 Front Street. We're the bright red building next to the post office, and we have a small white mailbox next to our side entrance. So you can just put your work in there and we'll get it back to you as soon as possible. The third method is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DEC can either send your work through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732, or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. Students can also fax their work in if you have access to a fax machine. If you'd like to connect with me through social media, both my Facebook and my YouTube channel are under the name B Slate Wahsa. So you can friend me on Facebook and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and then you'll get notifications every time I upload one of our videos. All of our radio Zoom classes are recorded, and I post them to YouTube shortly after airing. Also on YouTube, I have short videos that explain common errors and confusing concepts. In case you're struggling with something, there might be something there that can help you with sort of fundamental building blocks that aren't necessarily addressed in our course, but are skills that you do need and you might be struggling because they're very common areas that people struggle with. Math is a really visual subject, so I strongly encourage you to access the videos and not just listen to the audio. You're really not going to get the full experience unless you see the videos. So you can join me live, even if you don't want to talk to me, just pop in and watch. That's totally fine. Or you can watch the replays on YouTube. And then you can do it on your own time and pause and rewind if need be. If you don't have either of those options, you don't have reliable internet and that doesn't work for you, then let me know, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the recordings so that you get the full experience and set yourself up for success. If you have any questions or concerns, please reach out and contact me. My email address is bronwyn.slate@nnec.on.ca. My Facebook is bslatewasa. You can call me at the office at 807-737-1488, extension 2209, or toll free 1-800-667-3703. My office hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., though I teach the last hour of my day, so that's not a great time to get a hold of me. All right, we are moving into our last unit, Unit 4. We are starting with lesson 16 today, which is sampling data. We will be covering Unit 4 this week and next week, and then our final week will be reviewing all 4 of the units. All right, so our learning goals for today's lesson is that at the end of this lesson, you'll understand the difference between population and sample, and you will be able to describe and compare sampling techniques. Our success criteria, so how you know you've met these learning goals, is because you can distinguish between the population and the sample, and you can identify 6 different sampling techniques and the benefits and challenges of each. All right, so you're always asking, when are you going to use this in real life? Well, knowledge is power. It really, being able to understand how information is collected and presented is really sets you up for the most success in life. Understanding that means that you have a lot more information when reading media and consuming data and collecting information. So this is really all of the skills that we're developing is about empowering you to set you up for success in your life. All right, but first let's activate our brains with some mental math. I'm not a believer of math mad minutes. They generally cause stress and anxiety in students and don't actually benefit students in any way. They don't set them up for success or build any skills. So instead, we focus on developing strategies that you can use in various situations that are based on your comfort and your knowledge of numbers. So our question today is 14 times 120. So we're going to use the strategy of doubling and halving. So with this strategy, what we're going to do is we're going to cut one of our numbers in half and double the other number in order to make our question easier. And so we can always choose whichever one we want to do. So if we cut 14 in half and we divide that by 2, then we get 7. And if we multiply 120 by 2, we get 240. Now that's not necessarily very simple. If I cut 7 in half, I end up with a decimal because 7 is an odd number. So that's not really going to help me. So I'm going to say, instead of choosing that way, you still totally can, you'll get the same answer, but I'm going to choose to double 14 and halve 120. So if I double 14, I get 28. And if I have 120, I get 60. Still not particularly friendly numbers, so I'm going to do it again. I'm going to multiply 28 by 2, so I'm going to double it, so that's 56. And I'm going to cut I'm going to cut 60 in half. I don't know why it won't let me. My pen's giving me some issues. Sorry about that. All right, so 60 in half is 30. Still not a super friendly number. And cutting this in half isn't necessarily, that gives me 15, which isn't really going to be a friendlier number. So at this point, I might actually look at them and multiply them together and say, okay, well, 50 times 30 is going to be 1,500. And 6 times 30 is going to be 180. So that's going to be 1,680 is how much it equals. So sometimes The strategy that you pick doesn't necessarily make your life a lot easier. It may not. Really, you get to sort of pick and choose in terms of if it really does make your life easier. This maybe made it a little bit easier, maybe not, and you could maybe try a different strategy, and that's totally fine. We just try them out and see what works best for us. All right, mine's on. What prior learning do we need to know? So I just wanted to do a little bit of covering of statistics in our lives in general so that you can sort of see where this shows up. Looking at sampling and population, we're talking about data management and understanding statistics. So the study of statistics is the collection, analysis, and interpretation of data, as well as the effective communication and presentation of results relying on data. So not only is it gathering the information, but it's communicating the information and sharing that information. Statistics and data shape our understanding of the world around us. It isn't always numbers and graphs, but also can be words and pictures. So here is an example of a old from last year headline from a United Kingdom newspaper tabloid. So comparing one side, which says Kate's morning sickness cure, Prince William gifted with an avocado for pregnant Duchess. So here we're saying that Prince William is being sweet because he is giving avocados to pregnant Kate in order to help her feel better. And then the same newspaper media source says Meghan Markle's beloved avocado linked to human rights abuse and drought. So here we're saying that Meghan Markle loves avocados and this is a negative thing. There's been lots of conversation about how the media focuses, has a really positive light on Kate and a really negative light on Meghan. And this is based on a racist belief, as Meghan is biracial. So though we don't have any numbers or graphs in this, that information collected and then presented in this way shows us how information can be skewed or manipulated. We also have this critique on headlines, which is talking about violence and the representation of women in media. So a headline was published saying woman was flirty and very friendly in the hours before she was allegedly raped. And then, so the critique is Jane Gilmore has fixed the headline saying man accused of rape says alleged victim chatted to people at party. So instead of focusing on the woman as someone who was at fault for her rape, it then just says that the rapist was the person who is prefacing this, is situating it. So it's just sort of how we change our lens. And then this one is a CBS tweet said adult children are costing many parents their retirement savings. So this is putting the blame on generally millennials about not being able to be self-sufficient. And so fixing the headline is young adults are being forced to rely on help from parents to survive due to overwhelming student loan debt and crippling low wages. So the reason isn't that millennials and young adults are relying on their parents for support is because our society is not setting them up for success and instead burdening them with debt and not paying them living wages. So it's all about how we present this information. We can be looking at the same statistics, the same data, and presenting it differently. And then 2 images of pictures of young men. So these are the first photos released by the media of these 2 young men. One is a white man smiling, It's a school picture, I would assume, with a suit and tie with good lighting. And the other is a black and white picture of a young black man with no smile, with his hood up, looking directly at the camera. The white man, it says in text above it, says, "I was caught in the act of raping an unconscious woman." And the black and white picture of the black man, young man, was, "I was murdered after buying snacks from the store." But these are the two pictures that the media released. And so the media is, again, presenting a bias in terms of how they are situating these two young men, and who have very different situations and need to be perceived in very different ways. Anyway, that's just to show you how powerful statistics and data in our lives is, even in ways that you don't necessarily realize, because it's not just about looking at charts and tables of numbers. It's all this other information as well. All right, let's dive into our new concepts. So all of those headlines and images that I just discussed are one way that statistics show up, but then also statistics, sorry, I always scramble with that word, how they show up in our lives do actually show up in terms of numbers and graphs and maps and things like that as well, on charts. So here are a few places of some data that's presented in the media. So though this is from last year, this was the COVID statistics, what were being tracked, and you could see the rise and fall of COVID cases in, I had it narrowed down to Ontario. So that data, that graph gives you a lot of information about when the peaks in the curve and such. This map over here talks about Aboriginal languages in Canada. And so just shows you the vast diversity and how many people spoke Aboriginal languages in home in 2016. So it's a bit old, but that sometimes is the reality, is that it takes a while for data to be collected and processed and then information created. Here we have a image, again, of a picture of Canada, of the provinces of Canada, that talks about from bad to worse child poverty rates in Canada, and it compares Indigenous children to non-Indigenous children. And we can see just by briefly looking over it that the indicators of the Indigenous children are higher. There's a higher percentage of Indigenous children in poverty than non-Indigenous children. And so you can continue to have a conversation about that. And then we also have this one I collected from Statistics Canada. Again, it's a bit older, but this is age-specific suicide rates, the number of deaths by suicide per 1,000 people at risk, and specifically looking at First Nations males living on reserve and non-Indigenous males in Canada. So comparing them to see that the Indigenous men living on reserve are at a much higher risk of suicide than non-Indigenous men in Canada. And so that's just, this information is really powerful in terms of how we are creating supports and where we are focusing our attention. So all of these can really just give us a lot of information about communities and people who may need support. Okay, so that's just sort of, again, how we use this information. But now in terms of the actual lesson and the nitty gritty, let's make sure that we have statistics vocabulary that we all understand and can relate to. We know what we're talking about. So this is on page 2 of your IL booklet. So we've sort of situated ourselves, and now we're diving into the actual workbook. So first, defining population. So the population is the entire group of items or individuals being considered. So the population is everybody that we're talking about. Then a sampling or a sample is a small group of individuals or items chosen to represent the total population. So instead of asking every single person questions, sampling means that we take only a part of the people, the part of the numbers, and ask those people instead of every single one. Primary source data is data collected directly by the person or group who will use the information. So you only get primary data if you are the person who is asking the questions and collecting the information. If you look it up, if you research it, if someone else goes and asks questions and reports back to you, now this is secondary data. You're no longer the primary source. So secondary source data is data that's already been collected and is made available to the public. So it's made available to you, but was collected by somebody else. And then a census is a survey of the entire population. So taking a survey doesn't mean that every single person takes it, but a census means that every single person has the opportunity to take it. So why is sampling necessary? So it is really time consuming to survey an entire population. It's really time consuming to do a census and ask every single person and collect all that information. It is a lot of data to process. If you're asking every single one, then you need to process all that information, and it is a ton. And it also can be difficult to gather information from the entire population. So making sure everybody has an opportunity, as well as accessibility and I can't think of the word that I want, but making it accessible to everyone can be really challenging, and therefore you can get skewed information. So what makes a good sample? If we know that sampling might be easier to do, how do we know that we're getting a good sample opposed to a biased one? So it represents the population as a whole. So making sure that the information is representing everybody, even if you're not asking everybody. So then what is a biased sample? So this is when the sample is not representative of the whole population. So we'll look into examples in a moment. Here, so looking at this just graphic example, we can see that we have a population, we took the sample, we selected a certain number of people, just seems like by random, and that's how a sample works. So what is a reliable survey? If the results can be duplicated in another survey. So if you do a very similar survey, asking similar questions, gathering similar information, asking the similar groups of people, if it gets the same results, then it's reliable. If you get different results, significantly different results, because always there's going to be slight differences, then it's most likely that one of your surveys is biased. So then you need to continue to try to get non-biased information. Biased meaning that it is, again, not representative of everybody. It's being directed to one point of view or one opinion. So if you're selecting a sample, how we do this is that the sample of population has to be representative if it has the same characteristics as the whole population. So a sample is random if every member has an equal chance of being selected. So let's look at types of sampling to continue to understand this process. This is on page 3 of your IEL booklet. So the first type of sampling is called a simple random sample. So every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So here, if you look on, I have a diagram, we have a population, which is this whole, all of these gray and yellow dots, and the yellow dots indicate how we just randomly picked numbers or dots and asked questions of those individuals. So for example, this is like pulling a name out of a hat, which is something that is often done. If researchers begin with a list of telephone numbers from a database of all cell phones and landlines in the country, then using a computer to randomly dial numbers, the research could sample the group of people, ensuring a simple random sample. So just giving everybody the same opportunity to get picked is is what a simple random sample is. The pros of this is that it should represent the target population and eliminate sampling bias. So because you're not, because everybody has an equal chance of being asked. But the cons are that it's very difficult to achieve. It has a lot of time, effort, and money to make it happen. And there are systematic barriers that result in a biased sampling under the guise of being unbiased. So for example, like our phone example, if you don't have a cell phone or a landline, then you are not getting information. You're not accessing that. If you are, if you don't have any minutes, so you can't be called, you do have a cell phone, but you can't be called, you can only text, then you're not going to get information from those folks. If you're sharing a landline or a cell phone, then you're only going to get the information from one person in the household. That isn't necessarily going to represent everybody. You might be, anyway, so this just under the guise, you're not actually getting every single person has an equal opportunity. Necessarily, but the researchers think that everybody is. So our second type is called systematic sample. So every member of a population is listed with a number, but instead of randomly generating numbers, individuals are chosen at regular intervals. So you can see at our image, we're counting off and picking every certain number of people. So for example, all employees of a company are listed in alphabetical order. From the first 10 numbers, you randomly select a starting point. So say number 6, and then from 6 onwards, every 10th person on the list is selected. So 6, 16, 26, 36, and so on, until you end up with a sample of 100 people. Again, you could pick any other starting point, and you don't have to pick 10 like this is. You just have to be consistent. So the pros of this is that the sample should represent the target population and eliminate sampling bias. And it's simpler to execute than random sampling because you have some order. The cons is that sampling method is not possible without a list of all members of the population. So if you don't have that list, then you can't do it. Number 3 is cluster sample. So this involves dividing the population into subgroups, but each subgroup will have similar characteristics to the whole sample. Instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you randomly select the entire subgroups. So dividing up, so you can see here, the diagram has our dots divided up into 4 different colors, and then picking 2 of those colors that is we're going to talk to those people instead of asking everybody. So for example, you want to know how many high school students in Northwestern Ontario drank alcohol last year. You could study this issue by taking a list of all high schools in the area and randomly selecting a portion of schools, the clusters. Then you could survey the students within the selected schools. The pros are good for dealing with large and dispersed populations, and it can be fast and efficient because you don't have to go everywhere. You can just focus on one cluster or 2 clusters. The cons is risk of error in the sample, as there could be substantial differences between clusters. It's difficult to guarantee that the sample clusters are really representative of the whole population. So like for the example previously, the answers might be really different from a high school in KI versus a high school in Sioux Lookout versus high school in Red Lake versus high school in Dryden. Like who knows? We don't. That's going to be different information. And so that's not necessarily a great strategy. Sometimes it can be, but sometimes not. Number 4 is a stratified random sample. The population is divided into subgroups again, and a random sample is selected from each subgroup proportional to the size of that subgroup. So for example, if a company has 800 female employees and 200 male employees, we want to ensure that the sample reflects the gender balance of the company. So we sort the population into 2 strata based on gender. Then we use random sampling on each group, selecting 80 women and 20 men, which gives us a representative sample of 100 people. Now, I apologize, my example is fits within the gender binary, which isn't so this still is going to erase some people's experience because they don't necessarily fit within the categories of female and male. The pros are it should be highly representative of the target population, and therefore we can generalize from the results obtained. I mean, this is assuming that the 80 women represent the 80 other or 800 women and the 20 men represent the 200 men. This is complicated because identity and experience is gender is a construct, so it doesn't really make yourself guarantee that they're going to be representative. But that's the thing with this, is that nobody's can represent somebody else. Anyway, that's a little philosophical. The cons are gathering such a sample is extremely time consuming and difficult to do. Subgroups are defined by surveyors and might not accurately represent the population. So like I've been saying, this doesn't necessarily, categorizing people is really, really challenging, as, I mean, if you categorize, say, based on the color pants that everybody's wearing, that doesn't mean anything about your values or understandings of the world. So it's all sort of arbitrary. Number 5 is convenience sample. Now we're on page 4 of your IL booklet. So this convenience sample only includes those individuals who are most accessible and available to participate in the study. So in our diagram, we have our blue dot is, say, our researcher, and then the 6 dots that are closest to the researcher are the ones that are being asked. So this is just convenient. So the example, you're researching opinions about services available in Indigenous communities. You ask your family members to complete a survey on the topic. This is a convenient way to gather data, but as you only survey people in your family, this is not going to represent all Indigenous communities. So I don't live in an Indigenous community. I am not Indigenous. Therefore, if I ask my family who are accessible to me about this, they're not going to have that information necessarily. They're only going to have perceptions because they are not Indigenous. If you are Indigenous and live in an Indigenous community, then you're going to have an understanding, and people you ask are going to have an understanding of your community. But that doesn't mean it's going to be the same as another community. So the pros are it's easy and an inexpensive way to gather initial data. But the cons are there's no way to tell if the sample is representative of the population, and therefore you can't produce generalizable results. You can't say this is true for everywhere because you really don't unlikely have represented everyone. And number 6 is the self-selected, the voluntary sample. So interested people usually take part by themselves by filling in some sort of survey forms. So it's just whoever wants to can answer the questions. For example, after a business provides a service or good, they often ask customers to report on their satisfaction. You're at a grocery store, you got a receipt and it says, please fill out the survey on how we did today. Or you're on the phone with a telemarketer and they ask you to answer some questions afterwards about how they served you today, things like that. Because a business is asking all customers to volunteer their thoughts, the sample is voluntary and susceptible to bias. So because everybody can choose whether or not they want to answer, you're not going to get the full picture necessarily. The pros is this also is a quick way and easy for choosing participants. The cons is that it's always at least somewhat biased, as some people will inherently be more likely to volunteer than others. And those are our sampling methods. So how do we determine which type of sampling each of the following scenarios is an example of and justify our reasoning? So let's figure out if we can identify how we're likely sampling. So every 152nd person in the phone book is called to do a telephone survey about their political views. So this, because we have a number, this is going to be systematic because every 152nd person from a list was picked. This is systematic. We have a system. All right, example 2. Josh asked only his hockey buddies about which sport is the best. So because we're only asking people we know in a certain context, this is convenience. Josh is asking only his hockey friends. Chances are pretty good that they're going to say hockey is the best. So that's not really going to give you very realistic representation outside of that group. A company that makes shampoo asked 50 people with coily hair, 50 people with curly hair, 50 people with wavy hair, and 50 people with straight hair about hair products. So we're asking the same number of people with the most common hair types about hair products. So this is stratified. So people of various hair types are the subgroups. And then we are asking to make sure we get some of each of those, the same number of people of each of those groups. In an apartment building, the tenants on floors 2, 5, 9, and 14 are selected to participate in a survey. So this is cluster because all the people living on those 4 floors of the apartment building that has at least 14 floors are surveyed. So that's how we're picking clusters, and then everybody's surveyed. The entire population are the inhabitants of a small community. A small sample is selected at random. So this is a simple random sample. A small group of people are selected at random. It just sort of is what it is. And Facebook survey, where participants are asked whether they like using Facebook or not. This is voluntary, self-selected or voluntary. People on Facebook are asked about Facebook. They can choose whether or not they want to answer it. Okay, so now you can do the support questions on page 2 and 4, and these are questions 1 and 2. All right, let's do a few practice questions to make sure that we're really understanding this. A local high school has 600 students in grade 9, 400 in grade 10, 300 in grade 11, and 200 in grade 12. A sample of 250 students is used to choose which brand of chocolate bar should be sold in the vending machine. How many of the 250 surveys should be handed out to each grade? So this one, because we already have clusters or groups, so it's going to be useful to make sure that we get information from every single one of those groups. Now, does it make sense to do a whole cluster and just pick all of the grade 12s or all of the grade 9s? No, that's not going to give us a good reflection of, because the clusters are very different. So instead, we're going to do stratified. So we have strata or groups or clusters, and we're going to make sure we're getting a proportional representation of each of those groups. So again, we have 4 groups instead of just doing 62 from each of those groups. That's going to be a lot more grade 12s than grade 9s still in proportion, right? So we want to figure out proportionally how many there are. So the first thing to do is we're going to figure out the total number of students to figure out how many we needed each. So we have 600 plus 400 plus 300 plus 200 equals 600 plus 400 is 1,000. 300 plus 200 is 500. So we have 1,500 students. So we can do this a couple of different ways. So we're going to figure out how many grade 9s do we want. So how it makes sense to me to do is we're going to do 600 divided by 1,500. And so this, we're going to use our Desmos, tells us that 40%, because 0.4, 40% of the students are grade 9. So that means that 40% of the surveys should be from grade 9. So that is going to be, so we do 250 times 40%. Equals 100. So 100 of the surveys should be given to grade 9s. And then we're just going to do the same thing for all of the grades. So we have 400 divided by 1500 is equal to is equal to 26.7%. So that means that we do 250 times 26.7%. Equals 66.67. So can we have 0.67 of a student? No. So we're going to say 67 students are grade 10. 11 is 300 divided by 1500. With these things, often it's repetitive, which is 20%. So 250 times 20%. Well, we did 40% before, and that was 100. So 20% is going to be 50. And then 200 divided by 1500 is equal to, I know, is equal to 13.3%. I know it could be, you might not want to write all this out, but writing it out means that if you make mistakes, I know where they come from, which is going to be 33.33. So 33 people. Then you can just check to make sure, does that actually add up to 250? Well, 100. So 67 plus 33 is 200, plus 50 is 250. So that's how you can figure that out. So there should be 100 grade 9s, 67 grade 10s, 50 grade 11s, and 33 grade 12s surveyed. There we go. All right, number 2, in order to find out which videos are the most popular watched on YouTube, a survey was sent out to a number of teenagers. A, what are some advantages of using a survey to collect data? So these are the sorts of questions where there isn't necessarily one exact right answer. It's just a matter of interpreting your ideas and explaining it to the best of your ability. So what are some advantages of using a survey to collect data? Is that you can get detailed information. Can be easy, quick, and cheap. Again, giving me some answers. There's not necessarily one particular perfect answer. What are some disadvantages to this method? Can be time consuming. And data can be overwhelming. See, what would be another great way to get the same information? So maybe doing like a rating scale. Or interviews, depending on kind of, you don't know why you want this information. So it's really hard to know what would be a better method. So it's hard to, yeah, depends on the situation. These are the problem with these ones, is always depend on the situation. All right, number 3, a school board received a load of 10,000 graphing calculators to pass out to their high schools. They were concerned about the state of the delivery and therefore with a number of defective calculators. They decided to check them out. First, 2 whiting calculators were checked and all worked perfectly. Great. Second, then 100 calculators were tested and 2 were broken. Then third, 1,000 were tested and 15 were broken. After the first test, would it be fair to say that none of the calculators were broken? Why or why not? So if we only did the first test and we checked 20 calculators and they all work perfectly, can we say, great, all of these calculators are going to be perfect? No, because it's not a good representation. It's a small sample. So if we do 20 divided by 10,000, we're going to find out that that's only 0.2% of the calculators we know work. So that's not a very good representation of all of the calculators. If you're saying 0.2%, if you got 0.2% on a test, would you say that you really understand the material? No. If you got odds of getting sick by something and there was only 0.2% certainty of this information, would you really want to trust that doctor or that medical facility? No, that's not very good information. So that's why you need to take a larger sample in order to really understand if you're getting useful information. Number 4, Gelman's Rental want to see if they should open a second shop at a neighboring plaza. They conduct a poll by leaving sheets at the entrance of the plaza and asking people to fill them in. What type of sample is this? This is voluntary, right? Anybody who wants to can fill out the information. What are some of the pros of this method? So getting information from people who use the store. That could be really useful. Some cons of it is that they're only getting information at this location. So this location doesn't represent the other location. So that might not be useful. Oh no, I read it wrong. I read it that they were already at the plaza that they're already at. So it would be good to do it at the location because their other location doesn't represent this location. So doing it at this location would be useful. So it's getting information from people who use the plaza if their store would be useful. Sorry, misinterpret it. It's really easy to misinterpret things and get them backwards. So read carefully. All right, consolidate. What have we learned today? So we've been talking about sampling data. We learned about some vocabulary, population and sample. We learned about our different sampling types. So we had simple random, systematic, cluster, stratified, convenience, and self-selected. So hopefully you now are comfortable distinguishing between the population and the sample. You understand the difference between the two, and you can identify the 6 different sampling techniques and the benefits and challenges of each. So this can be a little bit tricky. It can take a little bit of practice to go through them. So give yourself some time and space to do that. But practice is what helps it make more sense. All right, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. As always, you can call me at the office at 807-737-1488, extension 2209. Feel free to leave me a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You can also call toll free at 1-800-667-3703. Send me an email. My email address is bronwyn.slate, and that's spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@nnec.on.ca. If you want to connect with me through Facebook, my profile is called B Slate Wahsa, and my YouTube channel is also B Slate Wahsa. Remember, all of our lessons are uploaded there after they air in a playlist called MBF3C. So check it out so that you can go through any information, either this one or previous lessons as needed. My office hours are Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Except on Thursdays, I'm actually in from 10:15 to 4:15. So please reach out and connect with me whenever works best for you. If there's a time, if our times don't line up, let me know, leave me a message, send me an email, and we can try to arrange a time that works for both of us if my office hours don't work for you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely day. Miigwech.